fantastic.
See, how are you? How's your wife and my kids?
Take your seats, gentlemen, please. Oh yeah, you're front and center. You're the superstars in this one. I'm merely on the side stage here. So my name is Leonard Sultana. I run a website called The Convention Collective, which is all about conventions and allows me to get to speak to these amazing talents up on stage. And it's a pleasure to have you here. MCM London welcomes you. How's London been treating you so far? Not so much for yourself, because you've been in the country for like seconds.
Just got out of the airport.
You just got out of the airport. You do have a microphone there,
Where's
sir?
the tequila?
Where's the tequila? Very good, excellent stuff.
Yes, it was an 8-hour delay at JFK.
Wow.
No, Delta. Delta, don't fly Delta. Unless you work for Delta, then I love you.
Excellent stuff. So we are going to be talking about X-Men through the ages. We're going to try and get as much as we can in, because like I say, mountain of work. We're talking hundreds of characters, we're talking hundreds of storylines. It's just an amazing body of work, and it really is a titan of that the comics industry. But the thing was,
You got him. You really don't need the rest of us.
that's what I just said in my introduction. We really could have 45 minutes with each of you individually, but we're lucky to have all four of you on the stage. Like I say, I think we were trying to get a gauge of where people got into X-Men. Because that, I think, is the tough thing, because it is so intimidating. It is to have all of that body and all that years of work. I want to ask you, how did you actually get into X-Men? What was the run, and indeed, do you have a knowledge of the issue of the X-Men, which you actually kind of got? Did it get you straight away, or how did you get into the X-Men? Do you have a mic? Do you remember? Do you have a microphone? Indeed. There's
Need a microphone.
Yeah.
Well, being an expat, I was working for Marvel. This is in January of 1968, and Roy Thomas and Neil Adams' arc on the X-Men was just underway, and part of my job as the office gopher was to proofread. And so I was thinking, this is the best stuff I'd ever seen. And Roy had plotted himself into a corner where the Sentinels had beaten the X-Men pretty much to death. And Cyclops had to figure out how to get rid of them. And he said, wait, you're robots, you deal logically, yes. What is the source of mutation? Your job is to eliminate mutation by eliminating the source. Having just read that National Geographic, the source of mutation had been theorized. The primary source is the sun. So if you want to get rid of them, just send them into the sun. So Neil Adams' attitude was, cool, full page splash. Giant shot of the sun, bigger than the page, with these itty-bitty sentinels just flying into it. Roy does this brilliant copy about they fade into the heart of the fire and they're never seen again. And that was my first X-Men.
So you wanted to work because of that work that made you want to get on the X-Men?
No. I just thought this is the coolest thing ever.
So what was the book that kind of?
I went back to my original career as a political theorist. In the Nixon years. And then went into acting and got my union card, and then went to work for Marvel as an assistant editor temporarily. And in the meantime, Roy had brought back the Sentinels and gave me a credit for the story, because I pitched the story idea to him. And I got $25, and I thought, wow, this is cool. I can earn money this way. So I figured I'd write some stories and earn some money and pay for summer stock.
So you were
10 years later, I decided I wasn't doing summer stock anymore. I was doing the X-Men.
So you were absolutely hooked from that storyline, from that panel, from that page.
Well, the characters are brilliant.
Yeah.
And looking at the characters portrayed by Neil Adams is brilliant. And, you know, Marvel is addictive. And when, you know, I was hired by Stan, so that was frightening in itself. But then the first person I met in the office who helped me realize there were real people and professionals involved was John Romita Sr., who even as like a gopher, you knew, wow, this guy is cool. I loved his Daredevil. And when he became art director, and Virginia Romita became basically the boss. Production manager, which is basically the boss. And you could not be in a better professional or personal learning environment as that, because these are two of the best people, and in John's case, one of the most gifted talents in the industry. And his son's good too.
Excellent. Yes. So, if we go to yourself, John, was there any... fair enough.
Otherwise, they've been sitting longer.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay then, Jorge, what was the run, or can you remember the issue which kind of got you absolutely into the X-Men?
Well, funny thing is that it wasn't the comics that got me into it, it was the 90s cartoon that got me into X-Men. Yep. I've been working in the industry for 10 years, so I'm kind of like new to all this. But that's what got me, that hooked me in, with the cartoons, and from then I jumped into comics. But back then it was all about Spider cartoons, Spider-Man, the Thundercats, He-Man, and the X-Men. But for some reason I just loved, the interaction that all the characters had, their personalities. And I grew up with the 90s X-Men. I mean, the work these guys made, it was part of what got me into it, and that's why I'm here today, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's what I'm trying to get from the question, is that there's many ways that people get into the X-Men, like you say, by the animated series, from even from the films, going in that direction for the newer audience. Was it the comics for yourself, Frank? I mean, which was the book that got you?
Yeah, it was the comics, but it was very broken up. I saw some X-Men when I was a child, but we never...
It's the same here. I think for myself, I didn't know where to jump in. I kind of struggled.
Well, the way it was for me, it was an older kid across the road. He had some American comics, and I didn't get American comics from anywhere else. And this was back in the kind of early 70s, mid 70s, and so I read British comics when I was reading comics, and then I kind of drifted away from comics, and it wasn't until after being at art school I started working for like a small press, independent, like underground comic in Glasgow, and some of the other guys there were big comic fans, and it was right next door to a comic shop, and I went in and asked the guy that owned the comic book store, what was worth looking at art-wise, and one of the things he gave me was a Uncanny X-Men. It was Jim Lee, and I was totally blown away with the art. But to be honest, I was so poor at the time, I actually couldn't afford to buy comics. So I would occasionally borrow comics from people, and I saw a lot of stuff while I was working on that comic. But my real kind of beyond that moment, I don't know if that was 1990 or thereabouts, beyond that little bit of an introduction, my main introduction was when Grant Morrison said to me that he was going to write the X-Men and he wanted me to draw it, and he told me to go and read the start of the X-Men with the...
Well, what was the start of the X-Men for yourself? Because it has started so many times.
This was the... Remember Marvel reprinted the Stan Lee's big black book? Pardon? Compilations. Yeah, it was all in black and white, yeah. And it was actually reading that was my main introduction to actually following the storylines.
Because go for it, Chris.
The thing was that when New X-Men came out, I was just like, holy cow. I mean, on so many levels, I disagreed totally with what Grant was doing, and yet I could not stop reading it because it was like, I want to see what happens next. I like these characters. The art is phenomenal. And I thought, finally, this is, for me as a writer, reading those issues was back when Frank was doing Daredevil, Frank Miller was doing Daredevil, and I was doing X-Men. It was like, anything you can do, I can do better, back and forth. And it was like being in, forgive the metaphor, at Wimbledon in the finals. I said, oh yeah, you're going to hit me in ace, I'm going to hit you back. Because it was such, they were such brilliant characters, so brilliantly portrayed, that I had to see what happened next. And so, of course, for X-Men in the end, I swiped as many as I could get. Which I figured, tough, I'm writing the last story. But it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
And for yourself, John, yeah, I believe, John, there you go. The story that kind of grabbed you, the one that kind of really made you love the X-Men.
I have no idea how it started. I don't remember. I just know that they put me working with him for a reason. In other words, you're too young, you need somebody like Chris.
Oh, because the first time they said no. Your mother said no.
No. Your father said no. She just is used. She's Sicilian. The word no is constantly in her mouth.
Sorry,
I did Spider-Man for a couple of years, and then I don't remember who came to me. I don't have any recollection of who asked me to do the X-Men, but they did say, and don't worry, Chris is the writer, and he'll, literally the word was, he'll help you along. Take your plots. Remember, these were not scripts, these were plots. Chris's plot for me was long. It was very descriptive. All right, stupid, this is what you do next. If you're helpless here, this is how I'll... So it was wonderful. And also Bob Wyacek was the inker. But the adaptation of Dante's Inferno was the one that almost had me jump out the window. I was only in a year. That was the first year. And to have somebody that inexperienced adapt Dante's Inferno to the X-Men, I thought Chris was doing it on purpose just to get me to quit. And it was nearly, I would like to do it now, because I'm a little bit better. Okay. Just now I'm better suited to do it, but not then. But it was difficult because I was inexperienced, but he made it much easier because of his plots and allowing me to follow that. Then Bob Wyacek also is a brilliant artist, he helped out. But John Byrne called me out of the blue and said, you won't last long, it'll fry you. He says, you're used to doing a single character. I had been Spider-Man. He said, you're not going to last long, it's going to kill you. And it took 4 years, but it didn't kill me. But I got significantly better in that frame of time because of his plots. It helped me as a storyteller. And the characters, I almost forgot what I was doing at the time because the story was all-encompassing as opposed to the individual. So you were able to portray the characters. I was too busy trying to make deadlines. And it was a killer doing a group book for the first time. But I improved significantly over the course of working with Chris, and I'll always thank him for that.
Well, and then of course he went to work with Ann Nesenti and created
Typhoid Mary.
Typhoid Mary.
That's my ex-wife, by the way.
And
I'm so jealous.
this is a true story.
And I hope she's not in the audience. Ann Nesenti comes up with the idea of Typhoid Mary. I was living with my ex-wife in Chicago, soon-to-be ex-wife, and she comes out of the bathroom, this is the 80s, with a gigantic head of hair, shoulder pieces. The only thing she didn't have on was the machetes, which came out later in our marriage. But it was the perfect image of this suicidal, homicidal maniac. And then the character, of course, was just like her. So it worked out that I was able to get away as soon as possible. But that's right, Typhoid Mary was because of Ann. And of course it killed off the series, my character. That was wonderful. Iron Fist is gone because of Typhoid Mary. See, my ex-wife kills the series.
Oh, the TV series.
TV series, Iron Fist is gone.
No.
Thanks to Patty.
Actually, Disney seems to be pulling the plug on all the Netflix stuff, so who knows, it may show up on the Disney Channel.
That's true.
When it comes to the storylines of X-Men, I think that's the thing that a lot of people take from the books, that these sprawling, epic stories of X-Men. But I remember reading in an interview with yourself, Chris, that you actually quite preferred the smaller storylines that did kind of like get in and out in 2 or 3 episodes.
Well, you have to understand.
Issues, right?
No, you have to understand. I come from. It sounds incredibly pompous, which is, I guess, my natural state to say this, but I was taught by Stan. It's like he hired me, he taught me, and Stan's rule was simple: 1-issue stories. Why? Because distribution sucks. And you never know if you're going to walk into the newsagent and they'll have the next issue there. So each issue is somebody's first issue, so you've got to establish everything, but do it artfully so it doesn't look like you're just telling the obvious. But each one has to be a continued story in 17 pages. If it's really, really good, you could go to 2 issues. If it's the coming of Galactus, the Silver Surfer, the Watcher, and the end of the universe as we know it, you can go to 3, but the last 7 pages are Johnny Storm departing for his first semester at university. That was the rubric. You had to be really, really good. So ideally, when you look at the X-Men, you will find that most of them are single issues. Some of them are 2-parters. There are arcs that may run for 5 or 6 issues, but you never do an issue without a break, without a commercial break, without somewhere to catch your breath, because you couldn't guarantee that the reader would get every one back in those days. So the nice thing was, if you found yourself going down a rabbit hole that wasn't playing out, you could bail on the story and go in another direction completely. You weren't locked into a 3-year, 50-issue, totally integrated codswallop that some think tank has spent a week on a mountain in upstate New York puzzling out, so we'll plot the next 2 years of stuff.
Did you guys have a specific character that you enjoyed more than? What was your favorite character out of the group? And what was it like working on a group book for the first time?
Working in it, but then I couldn't do a monthly book. I've never been able to do a monthly book, and when Joe Quesada, invited me to come over and work with Grant, he said, "I know you can't do a monthly book. You do the first 3 with the redesigns and set it up, and then just come back and do, Grant's written a lot of scripts, so I'll get them ahead of time." But yeah, working on a team book is so much tougher than a single character book, and I don't know. It wasn't so much that I had a favourite character, but there were pairs of characters that I particularly enjoyed the interplay between them. And
any examples?
I suppose the Cyclops and Wolverine, particularly in the run that I did, the way they work together and rub each other up the wrong way, just the contrast between the 2 types, and Jean and Emma as well,
Well, the Cuckoos are now TV stars.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I mean, that's what leaves me so awestruck, because Jack did 3 books a month. He laid out everything. I mean, there was one memorable day in the office when
John's shaking his head. It's like, how?
Well, John could do 2 books a month. I mean, Byrne could do 2 books a month.
That's because I put myself in debt.
Whatever works.
Pure greed.
But there was one memorable day where at like 10 o'clock, Messenger shows up with 4 pages from John Buscema. 10:15 shows up with another messenger, 5 pages from Sal Buscema. 10:30, another messenger with 3 pages from John. Then a half hour later, 6 pages from Sal. Then an hour later, 12 pages from John. By the end of the day, by 5 o'clock, they had both laid out, which in Buscema language is pretty much almost full pencils, an issue and a half each. And it was clear what was happening was the brothers were calling each other and saying, "Oh yeah, I did 3. Oh yeah, screw you, I did 5. And it's like, what? And you look at this and kind of go, how did they do that? And you look at the artists who were the foundation of Marvel in the 60s, and they could all do that. Herb could do that. John Sr. could do that. No?
John Sr. couldn't produce. He was too much. He was so tough on himself. And there were so many guys, like, well, not so many, but Kirby and Buscema intimidated him. And he loved what he was doing, but he was slow and he scrutinized himself, drove himself crazy, and he couldn't put out the work consistently like Buscema and Kirby. What was it like for you doing it? That was the first time you did a team book, correct?
Yeah, pretty much. But for me, the characters that I fell in love with, Gambit and Rogue, for some reason I always felt very attracted to the, I don't know, the chemistry that they had, because it was always so back and forth and it was not always stable. And I don't know, I just connected with that so much when I was a kid. Yeah, exactly.
I honestly fell madly in love with Storm right away. So that wasn't a problem for me, and I enjoyed it. But you seem to like, well, no, but we did the adaptation, Dante's Inferno, and you keyed on Michael. Yeah, so it didn't be your favorite character. I'm sorry, that was my impression. Otherwise, why would you send me to hell and do that book? Literally and figuratively.
We came back because I just read Dante's Inferno and I thought, this is cool. Let's do it as an X-Men. You know, the disadvantage of a slightly classical.
I honestly thought that doing a team book was tough. When I got off of it to do a single character book, I said, this is going to be easy. Of course, the writer that I worked with said, well, you've done team books, let's have a team of villains. And now I had Spider-Man with a whole group of characters and a cast of thousands, and it's been going on for 40 effing years.
Well, the problem is, with a single character book, you still need someone for the hero to talk to.
I know, but why do they pick on me? I had to do the X-Men Avengers run, and I still haven't finished it. I think it's 10 years out.
Better you than me, mate.
When it came to the, like I say, there's sprawling storylines, but then also they did spread out into the crossover books, and I think that's kind of where things. I know that Louise Simonson did a cracking job of herding cats to kind of keep all of those books together. But is that where you felt that things were starting to get stretched a little thin, when things were starting to just go off into all of these rabbit holes? Because you're also pretty much known for writing these plots and having lots of ways for the story to go.
Speaking as someone who has absolutely no ego whatsoever, the most modest and unassuming folk, it's like, why are you fucking up my stuff? Pardon me. Sorry about that. No, I mean, the problem is that I pretty much had my own way for, in Marvel's opinion, far too long. And playing well with others is great when you're working with Louise, because she's the grown-up. She can deal with an egotistical twit like myself. Larry Hama...
You were supposed to laugh, by the way.
No,
that's right. I love that.
Larry Hama is good because he can just punch me out. You know, but it's just the more people you bring in to write the book, the more homogenous it ends up becoming, because you've got to balance all these different visions. And it gets frustrating because I have a very specific view of who everybody is. My Gambit, the Gambit I created, has no representation at all in what exists now. The Sinister I created is totally different from who he exists now. But that's the reality of mainstream comics. The Superman that John drew is not the Superman that John Byrne drew, and it's not the Superman that is currently in print. That's the reality of Superman. And he's not even in the movies anymore, apparently. So you've got to balance the yin and yang, the things that one may know one is right versus the fact that, like it or not, the editor has the final word.
Was there any of those spin-offs that you did find got close to what you wanted to see on page, in terms of your characters, or was it all just, it wasn't what you wanted to see?
If I'm not writing one of the canon, I don't read any of it, because why should I stick a knife in my head? You know, when you find someone like Joss, when you find someone like Grant writing a book that you really want to read, it's like, oh, bugger. It's like, how come I didn't think of this? You know, so it's very solipsistic, I'm sorry. I do have an ego. We all have egos, and in my case, it's just, I know these guys deep down in my gut.
See, it's easy to say that, but when you grow up in an industry, first you have a father that's a brilliant artist to begin with, and then you have guys that you come into the industry with, and the guys just before you, was Byrne and Simonson, and come into the business with Frank. There's no way to have an ego because there's always somebody better than you. Who was ahead of you at the time? Stan? So shut up. You don't want to hear me.
Roy, no, you forgot Roy.
I had 9 Stans in front of me. I still, listen, Jim Lee is still around and the Cuba Toys is still around. There's never a way to have an ego as long as there's other artists that you admire and probably are better than you. The only thing you can hold on to is, maybe you tell a story a little bit better.
Well, the only thing you hold on to is, however I am today, tomorrow I'm going to be better.
But then you wouldn't have that if you had an ego. Every day I have to get better because there's guys that are better than me.
Well, because deep down inside I know I'm better than you.
And then I have somebody yelling at me.
And if I get really, really good, I can persuade this.
And then all you have to do is go online and read a couple of reviews that you suck and you know, your artwork is awful. And then I say, Dad, stop sending me emails, would you please?
Well, see, this is an advantage. Back in the day, people actually wrote letters.
You got letters, that's right.
With X-Men,
Bloody knives in it and shit like that.
well, we knew X-Men was onto something when we found ourselves averaging about 120 printed letters a month. And it was like, you know, here's an FF letter, here's a Spidey letter, here's another Spidey letter, here, X-Men letters. It's like, yeah. You know, and then you read them and it's like, okay, if these people are willing to write, we've got to do something that justifies it. And forgive me, the worst part of this was it was always fun, which is the one thing that makes this different from everybody else. I mean, you realize that we guys sitting up here can do in 20 pages what will cost Fox $100 million to do in 90 minutes. And you've got to pay the actors as well.
Good point.
And we do it every month. I mean, we can come up with anything a writer can challenge these artists to do. They are capable of not only doing it, but finding a way to do it brilliantly better.
And here's the point, this is because of guys like you being around for as long as you are, is how do you come up with something new every time as a writer? It's like coming up with a new melody or a new idea for a novel. How do you do that without being derivative? And then, as an artist, you have to have somebody that you try to get better than, do better than. But to come up with something that you haven't done before is nearly impossible because it's been done 1,000 times before you, let alone for when you start. So I'm concentrating on a panel that I want to try to do differently, and it ends up looking exactly like something I've done previously. But you still try to do something different. I don't know if that comes into your minds. It drives me bananas.
That's the one thing after Alan Davis left, and I was working with Chris Michello, I thought, holy cow, this guy is brilliant. I felt I was doing some of the best stuff I'd done in the 21st century since Salva. And I was looking forward to a chance. I went out to California, we sat down, we blocked out a year. I mean, I wanted that shot. But Marvel had to change your policy, and that's the thing you have to bear in mind, is your desires are always balanced against the publisher's desires, which may not suit you, but the opportunity to find the right artist and the right moment and the right arc of stories and see how they bring them to the characters to life. I mean, the story that I love the most that Chris did was 24 Seconds, where in 24 pages, 24 seconds, we wiped out, brutally, Jean Grey's entire family. Every relative I could get my hands on. We just wiped. And it was brilliant, because I'm looking at this and going,
He does say so himself.
No, the long one.
Oh, the long one? Okay.
No, the way Chris told the story.
No, I love this stuff.
The visualness, the visual storytelling, that's what wankers like me who can't draw lust for.
Great segue. Plots or scripts? Did you guys work for plots when you first started, or just
Once.
yeah, only once I've worked for
Did you enjoy it? Or was it?
Yeah, I was. The first time I read through it, I was like, what am I going to do with this? And then I read through it, and the second time I read through it, I realised there was like forward slashes every now and again, which were, I didn't realise that was where he was suggesting that I made, you know, like a page or panel breaks, but it was for it was a short 8 or 10 page story. It was Len Wein that had written it, and it was it was one of these, he did something in the last few years, I can't even remember what it was called. There was a short story at the end of every issue called A Snapshot, and this was a retelling. It had Darkseid sitting in somebody's armchair in a house, the room tube and all that stuff. It's New God stuff, and that's the only time, and I really liked it, yeah. But everything else has been full script.
So what we are wanting to do is we are wanting to get your questions in as well. So if there's anything you want to get to these guys and cut in, we are going to do this in about 5 minutes' time. I'm going to get a couple more questions in as best I can. Absolutely. Well, what you're going to do is, if you are wanting to get a question in, if you want to make a line up here by this microphone to the front right-hand side. But if you want to start getting into that line now, if you want to get a question into the guys. So yeah, over to yourself, Georgia.
Oh yeah, for me working on plot, I was used to just working with script, everything straightforward, just panels. And I can't remember what title it was. I think it was a Nightcrawler title. It was like almost like a one-shot thing. And I really enjoyed it actually. I think it gave me a lot of freedom. The other side, it's that you have to keep in mind your deadline. So it's sometimes for the Marvel, in this case it was Marvel, it's not as reliable, I guess you can call it. Like they like to keep it tight, so they know that at the moment you're laying out on your table, you have very specific instructions of what to do, and bam, 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 you knock out all the panels. And when doing the plots, for the artist it's more fun because you get to play around more, and sometimes that merges better with the story. At least that's what I got the feeling about. But I guess in the sense of business, it's not as reliable. I don't know if most artists will enjoy it the same way I did, I guess, or we did.
Well, the thing is, ideally it's a collaboration. You're doing duets. And so for me, the key is, if I'm working with John, if I ever get the chance to work with you guys, the idea is to toss the images in your direction and then see what you toss back. Because if I'm writing a script, I'm covering all the bases, so I'm filling in all the dots. I'm writing way too much because I want to make sure everything is clear to the reader. But, when you get a 6-page fight scene from Frank, the last issue of Wolverine, Frank and I talked for 20 minutes. I wrote notes, he did the story, he left all these empty spaces for me to write copy, and I looked at it and I thought, what the hell? This storytelling is brilliant. I don't need to explain anything, I'll just shut up and let the reader enjoy what's happening.
The best way of working on a plot is working with a writer who was an artist. I'm working with Frank on a Superman. It's a 200-page graphic novel. And the first issue is 65, actually all 3 issues are 65 pages. He gave me 3 pages of plot for the first issue. Literally 3 typewritten pages for 65 pages of artwork. And I could have made it 165 because he just seems to have every 3 or 4 words can give you 20 pages. That's just familiarity. But John Byrne did the same thing on the issue of Iron Man. 1 typewritten page for 22 pages. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but that was because I grew into the industry as working on plots. When I got on scripts, I actually struggled because it kind of limits you to what expressions you have to give the characters and so on. But it ended up, it's an amalgam now. It's dialogue and plot.
Well, that was going to lead on to my next question, because one thing when I've hosted panels about comics is that I've always felt that an editor is one of the strongest elements of the book, because they are the ones that guide the direction, guide the tone. But it almost feels with X-Men that it's almost best when the editors get the hell out of the way. Does that make sense?
No comment.
No.
But he is an editor and a writer at the same time.
Well, no. The thing is, the X-Men had the incredible good fortune of, at the crucial point in its creation, having Louise Simonson and Anne Nocenti as editors. Anne started as Louise's assistant, then took over. And between the two of them, Louise, like it or not, is just way smarter than me, smarter than pretty much everybody else in the building, and oddly enough, a grown-up, which gives her a ridiculous advantage. And Anne comes across as being 3 centimeters tall, especially standing next to Jim Shooter, and he couldn't say anything to her because she'd just look up at him with these big Sicilian eyes, and she would blink and it would be like, oh, sweet little Anne, and then she'd like cut him in half with her switchblade. Don't start your car tomorrow morning, Jim. And that was just brilliant. So you have
It's a Sicilian thing. You just wire somebody's car.
you have someone watching your back.
Well,
And that's what you desperately need in order to be able to do really cool stuff.
well, those two also are just they're essential to the history of the X-Men, absolutely. But I'd also like to talk about the women of X-Men, certainly when it comes to putting the books together. I mean, with X-Force, when Marguerite Bennett did that book with yourself, I mean, did you sense a different tone in the way that the books were being done with Marguerite doing that fantastic work on that book?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get to talk a lot with Marguerite to the whole process. When I got into the book, everything was laid out pretty much. I mean, they already have most of the plot figured out. For me, it was more finding the identity to each character, trying to familiarize, because I was never very familiar with the whole team, the She-Hulk and all those characters. So it was the editors in that book was more like a filter, you know, like they would just give me everything very diluted and just go straight to work. There was not a lot of interaction between the team.
Well, I was asking if anyone had any questions to step up to the microphone, and nobody's there. I think we've got time maybe for one question, and then just one question, and then we're going to unfortunately wrap things up. So yes, if you'd like to ask a question, please, sir.
Simple question. Who's your favorite X-Man?
As simple as that to get to wrap things up. Who's your favourite X-Men? It's a tough one, is that? Because you've got a roster of characters.
I'm going to say Scott, Cyclops. He's my favourite.
For me, it's Gambit.
Sorry? Gambit. Storm. Is it worth asking you that question, Chris? Because like you say, you love them all. There we go. I think it's just... I mean,
with a platinum blonde African lady. Come on. You don't find many.
hang on.
Actually, the scene I'm waiting for is Black Panther 2, and there's a storm outside, and Angela Bassett just like jumps up and rips off her hat, walks outside, throws up her hands and says, "Enough!" And lightning explodes out of her, and the storm goes away. And she turns back and says, "Well," because she was my original choice to be Aurora. Back when Jim Cameron was going to produce it, and it would have been.
It would have been gorgeous, wouldn't it?
Brilliant.
Thank you very much indeed, Fox. It's been a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, like I say, we have scratched the surface. We can just keep coming for us. Please make some noise, please, for Frank Whiteley, Jose Molina,